Hello. We are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are discussing a powerful tool that changes not just how we speak, but how we live, the power of positivity. My name's Anna, and I am here to guide you through building a mindset that makes learning English and life itself much brighter.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. Sometimes life feels heavy, and it is easy to focus on what is going wrong. Today, we want to talk about how to use English to shift our perspective and why positivity is actually a skill we can practice every single day.
That is such a perfect way to begin, Abel. And I want to start by saying something that might surprise some of our listeners. Positivity is not a feeling that just happens to you. It's not something you either have or you do not have. Positivity is a choice. It's a daily decision. And like any decision, the more you practice making it, the easier and more natural it becomes.
I really like that idea, Anna, but I have to be honest. There are mornings when I wake up and I do not feel positive at all. I feel tired or worried or just a little bit stuck. How do you make a choice to be positive when your feelings are pulling you in the opposite direction?
That's such an honest and important question, Abel. And I think a lot of our listeners are nodding right now because they feel exactly the same way. Here's the thing. Making a choice to be positive doesn't mean pretending that the difficult feelings are not there. It means that after you notice those feelings, you decide what to do next. You decide where to direct your attention. Think of it like this. Imagine you're in a room with two windows. One window looks out onto a gray, cloudy sky. The other window looks out onto a garden with green trees and flowers. The clouds are real. The gray sky is real. You are not imagining it. But you can still choose which window to look through for most of your day.
Oh, I love that image. Two windows. So you're not denying that the clouds exist, you're just choosing to spend more time looking at the garden.
Exactly. And this is especially important for English learners because the journey of learning a new language is full of moments that feel uncomfortable or discouraging. You forget a word, you mispronounce something, someone does not understand you. In those moments, the choice you make about how to interpret that experience will determine everything. It will determine whether you keep going or whether you stop.
That makes so much sense. And I think that leads perfectly into something I was really curious about before we started recording today. I've heard the phrase reframing before, and I wanted to ask you to explain it properly. What does reframing actually mean?
Reframing is one of the most powerful mental tools we have, and it's beautifully simple once you understand it. To reframe something means to take a situation and look at it from a different angle. You change the frame, just like you would change the frame around a painting. The painting, meaning the situation itself, stays the same, but a different frame completely changes how it looks and how it feels. In language, reframing usually means changing the words you use to describe your experience. And the words we choose are incredibly powerful because our brain listens to everything we say, including everything we say to ourselves.
Can you give us an example? I think I understand the idea, but a real example would really help.
Of course, let's take one of the most common things that English learners say. I can't do this. Maybe you're trying to understand a native speaker and they're talking very fast. Maybe you're trying to write an email in English and the words just won't come. And the thought that arrives is, I can't do this. Now, that sentence feels very final, doesn't it? It closes a door. It tells your brain, stop trying. There's no point.
Yes, absolutely. When I think I can't do this, I feel like giving up almost immediately. It feels like a wall.
Exactly. It is a wall. But now let's reframe that sentence. Instead of I can't do this, you say I'm learning how to do this. Or you could say I haven't mastered this yet. Or even this is challenging and that means I'm growing. Do you feel the difference? None of those new sentences are dishonest. They're all true. You're still acknowledging that something is difficult, but the new sentences keep the door open. They tell your brain, keep going. There is a path forward.
The word yet is doing a lot of work in that reframe, isn't it? I haven't mastered this yet. That one small word changes everything.
You're absolutely right, Abel, and that's a beautiful observation. The word yet is one of the most powerful words in the English language for a learner. It transforms a statement of failure into a statement of progress. It says, I'm on a journey, and I haven't arrived at this destination yet, but I'm moving towards it. Language teachers and psychologists both talk about the importance of that word, and I encourage every single one of our listeners to start adding it to their inner conversations. When you catch yourself thinking, I don't understand, add the word yet. I don't understand this yet. When you think, I can't speak confidently, add the word yet. I can't speak confidently yet. It's a tiny change with a very big impact.
I'm going to start practicing that today. I really am. Now, Anna, I've also heard you mention before that you have a morning routine that involves something called gratitude. Can you explain what gratitude is and how it connects to positivity and even to learning English?
I would love to talk about this because it's something I genuinely practice every single day, and it's changed my life in very real ways. The word gratitude comes from the Latin word gratus, which means pleasing or thankful. Gratitude simply means appreciating what you have. It means noticing the good things in your life and taking a moment to acknowledge them consciously and intentionally. And research in psychology, particularly in a field called positive psychology, has shown again and again that practicing gratitude is one of the most reliable ways to improve your mental well-being, your focus, and even your relationships.
It sounds wonderful in theory, but how do you actually practice it? Is it just thinking happy thoughts in the morning?
It's more deliberate than that, and that deliberateness is what makes it work. One of the most effective and well-researched methods is something called the 3 things exercise. Every morning, before you look at your phone, before you check the news, before you do anything else, you take 2 or 3 minutes and you identify 3 specific things that you are grateful for. And the key word here is specific. It's not enough to think, I'm grateful for my family. You need to go deeper. You think, I'm grateful that my sister called me last night and we laughed together for 20 minutes. Or I'm grateful that I had a warm cup of coffee this morning and I could sit quietly for a few minutes before the day got busy. The specificity is what activates the feeling of gratitude in your brain, and that feeling is what creates the positive chemical response.
That's interesting. So being vague about what you're grateful for doesn't work as well as being very detailed?
That is correct. When you are vague, your brain does not quite believe it. It processes it as just a routine thought. But when you are specific, when you call up a real memory or a real sensory experience, your brain responds emotionally. And that emotional response is where the real benefit comes from. Now, here is the exciting connection to English learning. When you do this exercise in English, when you practice thinking and writing your 3 grateful things in English, you are doing something remarkable. You are combining mindfulness with language practice. You are forcing yourself to find the right words to describe real feelings and real experiences. You are building vocabulary in a context that is personally meaningful to you. And you are starting your day with your brain already activated in a positive, engaged, curious state. That is a perfect state for learning.
So the gratitude exercise is not just good for your mood, it is literally a language practice tool.
Precisely. And I have spoken with many learners who say that their English writing improved noticeably after they started keeping a gratitude journal in English. Because when you write about things you genuinely care about, the language comes more naturally. You're not just filling in blanks in a textbook, you are communicating something real. And that authenticity makes the language stick.
I want to try that. I think I will start a small notebook just for this. But Anna, I want to bring up something that I think is really important and maybe a little bit complicated. I have seen something online called toxic positivity. I think some people use positivity in a way that is actually harmful. Can you explain what that means and how we avoid it?
Abel, I am so glad you brought this up because it is a critically important distinction and it's one that many people get confused about. Toxic positivity is when positivity is used to dismiss or minimize real, valid, difficult emotions. It's what happens when someone is going through something genuinely painful. Maybe they lost a job, or a relationship ended, or they're struggling with anxiety, and someone responds by saying things like, just be positive, or everything happens for a reason, or just focus on the good things and stop worrying. Those responses, even when they're well-intentioned, are harmful because they send a message that the person's real feelings are wrong or unwelcome.
Yes, I have experienced that. When I was going through a hard period and someone told me to just cheer up, it actually made me feel worse. It made me feel like I was failing at being happy.
And that's exactly the problem. Real optimism, genuine, healthy positivity, never tells you that your pain is invalid. It never says, you should not feel that way. Instead, it makes room for the difficult emotion. It says, yes, this is hard, this hurts, and that's completely understandable. But then it also gently asks, what is one small step I can take forward from here? Do you see the difference? Real optimism holds both things at once. It holds the difficulty and the possibility. It doesn't pretend the storm isn't happening. It trusts that you can navigate through it.
So it's not about being happy all the time. It's about having the courage and the tools to keep moving even when you're not happy.
That is a beautiful way to express it, Abel. Resilience, which is one of the most important words in discussions about mental health and personal growth, is not about the absence of difficulty. Resilience is the capacity to recover. It's the ability to fall down, sit with the discomfort for a moment, and then find a way to stand back up again. And a positive mindset supports resilience, not by erasing pain, but by reminding you that pain is not permanent. It's not the final chapter of your story.
I want to remember that phrase. Pain is not permanent. It's not the final chapter of your story. That's really powerful. Now, Anna, let's talk about something that I think affects all of us very deeply, often without us even realizing it. You mentioned before that the people we spend time with in the media we consume can affect our internal language. Can you explain what you mean by internal language?
Yes, this is a concept I find endlessly fascinating. Your internal language is the voice inside your head. It's the running commentary that narrates your life. It's the words you use when you talk to yourself about your mistakes, your successes, your fears, and your hopes. Most people have a very active internal language, but they've never really stopped to listen to it carefully. And here's the critical point. Your internal language is not entirely your own creation. A very large part of it was absorbed from the people around you, from your family, your friends, your teachers, and from the media you have consumed over the years.
That's a little bit unsettling to think about. So the voice in my head might actually be repeating things I absorbed from other people.
In many cases, yes. If you grew up around people who often said things like, we cannot do that, that is for other people, or do not take risks, it is too dangerous, or you are not good enough for that, those phrases can become part of your internal script. And as an adult, you might hear yourself thinking those same thoughts without even knowing where they came from. The same is true in reverse. If you grew up around people who said, you can figure this out, or mistakes are how we learn, or let's try and see what happens, those phrases also become part of your internal language. They create a foundation of confidence that supports you throughout your life.
So the people in our lives are actually shaping the way we talk to ourselves. That is a huge responsibility, both for ourselves and for the people around us.
Enormous. And this is why I always encourage people to be very thoughtful and intentional about who they spend their time with. I am not suggesting that you should only be friends with people who are perfect or endlessly cheerful. That goes back to the toxic positivity problem. But I am saying that you should notice how you feel after spending time with certain people. Do you feel energized, encouraged, and clearer about your goals? Or do you feel drained, doubtful, and smaller than before? Those feelings are information. They are telling you something important about the relationship and about the influence that person is having on your internal language.
And what about media? Because I think we spend so much time consuming media, whether it's news, social media, podcasts, or videos. How does that affect our positivity and our mindset?
The impact of media on our mindset is profound, and it's something that researchers have been studying intensively for the past decade. Our brains have what is called a negativity bias. This is an evolutionary feature that means our brains are naturally more alert to negative information than to positive information. In the ancient past, this was useful because it kept us safe from danger. But in the modern world, where we are surrounded by news and social media that are designed to capture our attention, and where negative headlines are often the most effective at doing that, this negativity bias can become a serious problem. We can end up in a state of constant low-level anxiety and pessimism without even realizing why.
That explains so much, actually. I notice that after I spend a long time scrolling through social media or reading the news, I often feel more anxious and more negative, but I never quite connected it to the negativity bias before.
It's one of those patterns that becomes much easier to manage once you can see it clearly. And the solution is not to completely ignore the world or to pretend that difficult things are not happening. The solution is to be intentional and conscious about what you consume and for how long. Many people find it helpful to set specific time limits for news and social media. Some people have a rule that they do not look at their phones for the first 30 minutes of the morning, which protects that early morning mental space for something more nourishing. And replacing some of that media consumption with content that educates, inspires, or genuinely entertains you, like this podcast, like educational videos, like books that expand your thinking, creates a very different kind of internal environment.
And for English learners specifically, choosing to consume English media that is positive and educational is doing double duty, is it not? You're improving your language and your mindset at the same time.
Perfectly said. And this connects beautifully to our next topic, which I think is one of the most important concepts for anyone on a language learning journey. I am talking about the growth mindset. This term was developed and popularized by a psychologist named Carol Dweck, and her research has changed the way educators and learners around the world think about ability, effort, and potential.
I've heard the phrase before, but I would love to hear you explain it in your own words. What is a growth mindset?
A growth mindset is the belief that your abilities are not fixed. It is the belief that intelligence, skill, talent, and competence are not things you are simply born with or without. They are things that can be developed through effort, practice, good strategies, and time. This stands in contrast to what Dweck calls a fixed mindset, which is the belief that your abilities are permanent and unchangeable. A person with a fixed mindset might say, I am just not a language person. Some people can learn languages and some people cannot. I am one of the people who cannot. And with that belief firmly in place, every difficulty becomes evidence that they are right. Every mistake confirms the story. Every struggle is a reason to stop.
I used to think exactly like that about English, actually. I used to believe that some people were just naturally gifted with languages, and that I was not one of them. It was a very discouraging belief to carry around.
And it's an incredibly common one. But here's what the research actually shows. Language acquisition, the process of learning a new language, is almost entirely a function of exposure, practice, and consistency. There is no reliable evidence that some people are simply born as natural language learners and others are not. What there is strong evidence for is that people who believe they can improve and who therefore continue practicing even when it is difficult do in fact improve. The belief drives the behavior, and the behavior produces the result. The growth mindset creates a self-fulfilling cycle of improvement.
So, in a way, believing you can do something is actually part of how you learn to do it.
Exactly. And this is where positivity and language learning become deeply intertwined. A learner who approaches their English practice with a positive, growth-oriented mindset will handle mistakes very differently from a learner with a fixed mindset. When a growth mindset learner makes an error, they think, interesting, why did I make that mistake? What can I learn from it? When a fixed mindset learner makes the same error, they think, See, I knew I was not good enough. I cannot do this. The mistake is identical. The interpretation is completely different, and that interpretation determines everything that follows.
That is such a clear way to explain it. I want to ask you about patience, because I think patience is something that every language learner struggles with. We want to be fluent quickly, and when progress feels slow, it is very easy to become discouraged. How does a positive mindset help with that specific challenge?
This is perhaps the most practical and important application of everything we have discussed today. Patience in language learning is not passive. It is not simply waiting and hoping that fluency will arrive one day. Active patience means continuing to take small, consistent actions every single day while accepting that the results of those actions will appear gradually and not all at once. A positive mindset supports this kind of patience because it keeps you focused on the process rather than only on the outcome. Instead of thinking, I am still not fluent, a positive, growth-oriented learner thinks, today I learned 3 new phrases. Today I understood a conversation I did not understand last week. Today I was brave enough to speak even though I was nervous. Those small acknowledgments matter enormously. They feed the motivation that keeps you going.
I think I have been too focused on the destination and not enough on the journey, and when I focus only on how far I still have to go, it feels overwhelming and discouraging. But when I look back at how far I have already come, I actually feel quite proud.
And that pride is not arrogance. It is legitimate recognition of real effort and real progress. I encourage all of our listeners to keep a record of their progress. Write down the things you could not say 6 months ago that you can say today. Write down the conversations you have had, the episodes you have understood, the emails you have written. That record becomes a powerful piece of evidence against the fixed mindset voice that tells you you are not improving. Because when you look at concrete evidence of your own growth, it is very hard for that negative voice to maintain its argument.
That is such a practical piece of advice. Evidence against the fixed mindset voice. I love that framing. Anna, before we bring everything together, I want to ask one more question that I think is on the minds of many of our listeners. Is it possible to become a more positive person if you have spent most of your life being quite negative or pessimistic? Is it too late to change?
It is absolutely not too late, and I want to say that as clearly and as warmly as I possibly can. The science of neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to form new connections and pathways throughout our entire lives, tells us that the brain can change at any age. Our patterns of thinking are not carved permanently into stone. They're more like paths through a forest. The paths that you walk most often become wider and easier to travel. The paths you stop walking gradually become overgrown and harder to find. When you begin practicing new patterns of thought, when you begin reframing, practicing gratitude, choosing your media carefully, surrounding yourself with encouraging voices, and approaching challenges with a growth mindset, you are literally creating new neural pathways. You are building new, wider, easier paths in your brain, and over time, those new paths become your default route.
That is such a hopeful image. New paths in the forest. And every time we practice one of these techniques, we're taking another step down that new path.
Yes, and every step counts, even on the days when it is difficult, even on the days when the old negative path feels much more familiar and comfortable. The fact that you keep choosing the new path, even imperfectly, even with effort, that is the practice. That is what builds the new mindset. There's a phrase I love very much. You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. The same is true of positivity. You don't have to be perfectly positive to begin, you just have to begin.
I think that's the most encouraging thing I've heard all day. And I feel like everything we've talked about today connects so beautifully. The reframing technique teaches us to change the words we use about our struggles. The gratitude practice trains our attention to look for what is good. The distinction between toxic positivity and real optimism reminds us to be honest about our feelings while still choosing to move forward.
Being thoughtful about our surroundings and our media helps protect our internal language, and the growth mindset gives us the patience and the courage to keep going even when progress feels slow.
You have summarized this so eloquently, Abel, and I want to add one final thought for all of our wonderful listeners. Everything we have spoken about today, every technique, every mindset shift, every small daily practice, it all leads to one place, the confidence to use your voice. In English and in life, confidence does not come before you take the step. Confidence comes from taking the step, even when you are not sure you're ready. A positive mindset is the foundation that makes you willing to take that step again and again, until one day you look back and realize that what once felt impossibly difficult now feels completely, naturally, and joyfully yours.
In that moment, the moment when the language starts to feel like yours, is worth every difficult day, every moment of doubt, and every brave, imperfect step it took to get there.